problem-solving process. I think one way to think about it is come up with new ideas, select ideas that fit the task the best, and just kind of circle back and through this process. So that's process of the people. Then we have products.
And these products, they can be behaviors, it can be an idea, it can be an artifact. It's anything that comes out of the process. It could be a class activity, it could be what your students hand in. And a lot of the product area is where the assessment comes in. That how do we assess creativity? Some people do things based on the creative person, who's creative, look at the creative personality. Some people, less of them, look at the creative process and evaluate it. But most people, it would be have people produce something creative and through a variety of ways try to assess how creative that product is.
And we'll talk more about how you assess creativity. But yeah, it's usually at the product phase when you're getting the assessment component going. So we have person, process, products. The fourth P, which is kind of a stretch P.
It's called press, sometimes it's called place. Really it should be called environment, but then you'd have the 3 Ps and the E, which just doesn't work.
As good as the 4 Ps, right? All right, so press. But this is really important literature, and there's a long body of research that I think is particularly applicable for the classroom. Sometimes when we think about the high levels of creative accomplishment, this probably is less applicable, but I think when we're thinking about youngsters in classrooms, this is how do you set up a creative classroom environment, the press of the environment. So creative supportive environments are interesting, they're challenging, they're enjoyable, they're engaging. And as we heard earlier, and they're subjective. That is the trick. So what one kid finds interesting, engaging, enjoyable, another finds boring, terrible, miserable, right? So we have to understand that it's really how the student is experiencing it. But there's ways that you can, on average, make sure that you're creating a creative supportive rather than suppressive environment. So here's a couple quick tips.
And before I go, you go on, a lot of the stuff that you were talking in the beliefs and values, feedback, collaboration, flexibility, trust, safe environment, risk-taking, a lot of this is towards forming a creative supporting press or environment. This is where that stuff is most appropriate and most important.
Yeah, so that's right out of your district's belief statement. We actually highlighted each one of those words under there. And if you just think about what would that actually look like in your classroom, and more importantly, how can you model that, right? So again, going back to my student teacher who had the sequence, who was kind of a perfectionist, perfectionism can be very dangerous in the classroom. So when she was student teaching, I was observing her. She developed a lesson where she had students basically playing a game of Pictionary. And like a good teacher, she played along with them. So she was on one of the teams, and she had to draw an ear of corn. And so she's up at the board drawing, she's trying to draw these perfect kernels of corn. And her kids, these fourth graders, are like, time's running out. What are you drawing? Little squares? What is that? And she's like, perfect. She's just a perfectionist, right? I have to draw the perfect ear of corn. And finally, she just kind of drifts off and says, I can't draw, I'm done. And the kids are like, well, then get out of the way, right? We'll take over. And they took over. Kids are pretty resilient like that. But the interesting thing is, this is an elementary classroom. Later on, when she's teaching a math lesson, she developed this really interactive math lesson. She goes to this kid. He's totally checked out of the lesson. And she kneels down. And she's like, this lesson might be really interesting for you. And he just has nothing to do with it. He sits back even further. And she checks in with him more. And he's out. And finally, this kid says, you're not good at drawing. I'm not good at math. You don't have to draw. I don't have to do math. And these other kids push back to you and say, yeah, that's right. We saw you with that corn, right? And so the whole idea of what we model is very powerful. So are we willing to take those risks, to make mistakes, to recover from those mistakes? That sets the tone for our students. And it's right in your belief statement. Think about how you can model those things in your classroom. So here's a couple other tips.
And one of the big fields within creativity is the idea of motivation. How do we motivate people to be more creative? And one of the very consistent findings, and intuitive, is that people are more creative when they are personally interested in whatever they're doing. This is a little bit of, kind of obvious, although a lot of our findings are not. But one of the things that's a little counterintuitive is that rewards can reduce this intrinsic motivation, where often motivation is conceptualized as intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic means I am personally interested. Extrinsic means I am doing it for money or the grade or extra credit or praise or recognition. And sometimes we need extrinsic motivation. Most people clean their toilets out of extrinsic motivation. They want a clean toilet. They don't enjoy cleaning their toilet. There are other things that most people only do for intrinsic motivation. When I play with my dogs, nobody is rewarding me. I just enjoy it. The danger is if you have something where you already have somebody who's personally invested and they like what they do, that's where extrinsic motivation can kind of come and slap it in the face. And this can be applied to animal training where, let's say that you want your dog to not bark. The dog barks presumably because there is some type of intrinsic reward out of it. If you start giving a bone whenever your dog barks, it associates barking with a reward. I bark and I get a reward. You then slowly start removing the reward, and your dog's thinking as much as it can, I'm not going to bark for nothing. Fine, I'm not going to bark then. And that's one way you can train out the barking behavior. So when you reward things that people enjoy, you can basically squash out their enjoyment of it.
Yeah, and I'll give you a really clear classroom example. I think this is a really important point. Where you're trying to extrinsically motivate, you're replacing potentially an intrinsic motivation. It's the reason. Motivation is really the reason why you do it, right? So, are we doing it for our own internal needs, or are we doing it for some other reason? So, there's a great example given by Alfie Kohn. He was kind of an education writer, so you might be familiar with it. And did you all ever experience the Pizza Hut Book It program? Anybody experienced that? Okay, a couple people. So, Pizza Hut. Anyway, Pizza Hut gives personal pan pizza if a child reads a book and completes the accelerated reader quiz. So when I was teaching, that was a big thing. Pizza Hut Book It program was introduced in our district, blah, blah. All right. Alfie Kohn gave the best critique. It's a little bit exaggerated, but it's one of the best critiques I've ever heard, and it speaks exactly what James was saying. So what he says is, when you give kids pizza to read, they saw reading go up. More kids started reading, okay? But then he said, what happens in the summertime, right? What happens in the summertime when the kid's like, I read this book, Mom, where's my pizza? It's like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to give you a pizza for reading the book. And so, no more pizza, no more reading. So what Alfie Kohn said is, what we ended up with at the end of Pizza Hut Book It is a lot of overweight kids who hate to read, right? Because we replace their joy, especially for kids, this is really important, kids who like to read just because they enjoyed reading, they like pizza better, right? So if you put something that they enjoy more, their intrinsic motivation is replaced with pizza. And when the pizza disappears, so does their motivation to read. So there is danger, actually, in trying to motivate with something that's so extrinsically powerful that it strips away our intrinsic reasons. But sometimes that is necessary. Okay.
We've already covered that.
So here's a quick example. We want you to kind of experience this. We're going to give you a puzzle to solve, and you can talk amongst each other. We're actually going to split the group. Let's see, where should we split? We'll split right down the middle here. So it'll be here, here, you, and you. And so it's going to be two groups like this, okay? So this is going to be group 1, and this is going to be group 2. So we're going to introduce the puzzle, then we're going to give instructions to group 1, and group 2 is going to be going to be covering their face, looking away, that kind of thing, right? And then we'll give instructions to group 2, and group 1 will be looking away, okay?
You should probably do the instructions first.
So I'll give you the instructions. So group 2, look away, no looking, no cheating.
La 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 la.
Okay. Group 1, here's your instructions. So go ahead and read those instructions. Group 2, look away, group 2. Group 1. Okay. Group 1. Anybody need more time, group 1? Okay. Look away, group 1. Group 2. Look away, group 1. Don't look. Group 2, these are your instructions. Group 2, go ahead.
Remember, la 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 la.
Look away, group 1.